So, the late great fantasy author Sir Terry Pratchett had this wonderful theory that as humans, we're not in fact Homo sapiens, wise men, but we are instead Pan Narins, the storytelling ape. His view was that our ability to tell stories, our imagination, ability to make sense of past, present, and extrapolate into the future is really what sets us apart from anything else. And is quite compelling, and indeed in his stories, which I thoroughly recommend to anyone who hasn't encountered them already. And this philosophy is really expanded upon very well. But what can we learn from this for business? Well, I'd say that essentially storytelling is the basis of all human learning. We learn by figuring out the story, even if what you're looking at is a mathematical equation or a piece of computer code. What you're actually doing is saying, if this, then this. This is the story of of whatever that thing is. If you do this thing, here's what's going to happen. This is what will come out of it. Is fundamentally that is storytelling, and that is how we understand anything. And in business school, what I've been finding is that we have two ways in which we construct these stories, narratives, if you prefer. I don't know. Do you have a problem with calling it a story? Is that too much of a sense of fiction, or are you okay with it? So we have two main ways we construct these. First, through models, which is to say, you build a model of how a business process or a concept will work. So you have this this is your starting state. You'll go through, and then you get a particular output. That can be a process. It can be even just such a thing as, if we give these kind of incentives, this is what will happen. Anything can be expressed essentially as a model. And then the other, of course, is case studies, which is to say, this is something that actually happened, which is always worth looking at. Can we apply the model to it? What does it tell us? Does the model work? Are there obvious holes in the model? So essentially you can take a good critical look at the model and see whether it actually stands up to the rigour of actually explaining something that really happened. And then if you're pretty sure that your model it actually works, then you can maybe apply it to things that are happening now and take a bit of a guess at what might happen in the future on the basis of that, which is obviously very handy. Now, coming, as I do, from a background in history and politics, I found this idea of models and case studies to be quite hard to actually get my head around at first, because if you think about it, in history we don't have models as such. It's more what happened and why. But essentially, I think that there is quite a solid overlap, because the concept of a model is you're generalizing from the what happened and why, because I suppose in business you're looking at I suppose things that happen on smaller time frames more repeatedly and in many different places, even at the same time. For example, if you wanted to look at, I'll take an example we did last week, senior executive reward, CEO pay. You've got the examples of millions of companies around the world. Yes, they'll be in different industries, doing different things. They'll be in different countries. That the context of these businesses are going to be different. But essentially, you can look at how they're all doing the same thing. So you have a much bigger sample size. Whereas if you wanted to look at trying to evaluate what was the main cause, say, of the First World War, you've got the First World War, and you know what happened. Drawing the right linkages between that is something that already causes historians a great deal of debate. You've got everything from your orthodox view to the revisionist view and the post-revisionist view, and so on, because as more information and more perspectives are unearthed and new links are drawn between them, historians build up on each other's past thoughts, and you get a much more in-depth view of each individual event. Now, if you wanted to say, we've got all these different causes, what was the most significant, you might well try to compare and contrast that with similar events taking place maybe in a different continent or at a different time, and see what similarities they have. But essentially, you're always dealing with a very small sample size, and not to mention that you tend to also be dealing with quite imperfect information. As in history, we look for primary sources, the eyewitness accounts, as it were, or documents really from the time. Then you've got your secondary sources, which is someone intelligently talking about what they've, well, you hope intelligently, someone talking about what they've seen. And then tertiary sources, which might be, say, a textbook. So, for example, if we take the example of the recent American presidential candidate debates, a primary source would be what's actually said. A transcript, say, is a primary source. A secondary source is your friend Fred says, oh yeah, I watched that debate last night. Here's what happened. That's a secondary source. And then the tertiary source will be in maybe 10 years' time when someone's written a book on this, and that they're collating a bunch of primary and secondary sources and drawing inferences from that. That's what makes it tertiary. So we don't tend to have that level really of analysis, I think, in management examples, unless they're really, really in depth. Major problems like Enron, you could probably get it. The financial crash, you can get it. But if you're just looking at your average management issue, it's unlikely, because why would someone have invested that level of detail? But what you can get is a wide range of case studies which give you a good indication of what happened. Typically, these are built on interviews with people who were involved, so they are. You can't assume that they're unbiased if we take a historian's perspective, but they certainly can tell us a lot of very useful information. Plus, the fact that we have access to, say, listed company records means that we've got a good deal of information that we can cross-check against. So it's the same kind of detective-y process that you have to do as a historian, but then you've got just a slightly, your information's presented differently, and then you have these models. Because you have this wide range of information, you can generalise from it very easily. Whether or not you generalise accurately, totally different question. But you can generalise, you can build a model, and you can test your model by then running it against a case study. Brilliant. So, what could go wrong? I think the big danger of taking the model-based view is when you start thinking that the model is the point. If you assume that the model is truth rather than a way of representing the world, then at that point you'd start putting the cart before the horse, and you might discard important facts, certain perspectives, because they don't fit the model. And if you do look at, say, Enron or the financial crisis, I think that's something that really comes out quite strongly from those, is that people say, but we had this model. This model said that it was working. Yeah, because this model was based on the fact that it was working. So that's always the danger of using a model, is that although it can allow you to predict, it does not inherently predict, and you need to always be critical about them. So I hope that's been interesting, and that's it for me from tonight. I shall be seeing you soon.